The new classicals rejected the idea that there was any necessary trade-off between inflation and higher unemployment. They argued that an expansion of aggregate demand lowered unemployment only because the acceleration in prices was not anticipated. Firms that mistook higher market prices for higher real returns would be willing to produce more. Workers who mistook higher market wages for higher purchasing power would be willing, if unemployed, to take a job sooner only because they were fooled. Increased output and lower unemployment would, however, be temporary, because neither the returns to firms nor the purchasing power of workers was corrected for inflation, which was really high. As soon as they realised this, firms and workers would return to the old levels of production and labour supply. However, what's more, the new classical economists thought that workers and employers would not be easily fooled again by the same policy. Another consistency in their model we see with the rational expectations theory. The combination of rational expectations and the central tenet of new classical analysis that quantity supplied equals quantity demanded ensures that aggregate demand policies such as government purchases do not have real effect on the output of an economy. Now, the Phillips curve trade-off can be observed in the data, they claim, because some part of policy is always unanticipated. But policymakers cannot exploit it systematically because the public will see through this. Time inconsistency is also a factor to consider when weighing the benefit of discretionary versus rules-based monetary governance. The argument that new classical economists use against the discretionary policies of the Keynesians includes dynamic time inconsistency. They posit that normal method of stating targets for unemployment and inflation, and then attempting to carry out measures to keep the targets and inflation rate at a certain level, does not work well with social sciences. They prove this by the use of microeconomic game theory, showing how the authorities have reason to say one thing and do something completely different. Once again, we see how the rational agent's assumptions leads the new classicals to carefully analyse the situation with the use of microeconomic theory. Please try to follow carefully here, as the analysis is complicated algebra. Your course notes should help you here, as the algebra is not always easy to explain verbally. The Phillips curve shows the trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and can be manipulated to form the equation as follows. U equals UN minus A, bracket N minus NE, which is NE is expected inflation, N stands for inflation of course, U stands for unemployment, now, and UN stands for natural rate of unemployment. Unemployment will be high if N is greater than expected inflation, and low if inflation is less than expected inflation. Assuming for the sake of an exercise to see if discretionary rules or rules-based policy results in the lowest inflation with the highest socially optimal output level, we will assume that the Reserve Bank can control the money supply perfectly. The loss function between U and N, inflation and unemployment, is represented by Y. In this test, the Reserve Bank will aim to keep the loss function as small as possible. If the Reserve is operating under a rules-based system, then it is bound to keep the inflation level to inflation star, thus, which is the target, or the target inflation. Thus, all economic agents will expect inflation will equal the target inflation. Because the promise is credible, because the promise is a credible one due to the system in place in the Reserve, if this does not happen, then unemployment will equal natural rate of unemployment. No matter what happens, the inflation rate will be maintained at the natural level, at the target level, sorry. Because there is no benefits from having the target inflation greater than zero, the Reserve will keep inflation at zero. However, if discretionary policy is allowed free rein, then all the agents will form expectations of inflation. Then the Reserve will choose the inflation rate, and there will be a discrepancy between expected and natural inflation. This discrepancy will determine the unemployment rate. Thus now we will work with the loss function and Phillips curve to discover the optimal discretionary income. We combine the Phillips curve with the loss function to get natural rate of unemployment minus A, and natural rate of inflation minus expected rate of inflation plus yn squared. We have to differentiate this in terms of inflation, n, to understand how this equation reacts in terms of n. Thus we get change in L over change in n equals negative A plus 2yn equals 0. We rearrange to get change in n equals A over 2y. Thus we see that if y is large, change in n will be small, and vice versa. Thus, by invoking the rational expectations theory assumed by the new classicals, we get NE equals change in n equals A over 2y, which means that unemployment equals natural rate of unemployment. Thus, it is vital that the Reserve Bank keeps inflation at a small level. However, when we compare these two scenarios, we find that there's an inflationary bias in the discretionary system as compared to the rules-based system, where no inflation was present. Now comes my opinion on the new classicals. I do not believe that the new classicals are entirely correct here. Several of their assumptions are unrealistic. George Soros, in his book The Crash of 2008, points to the fact that markets are never liquid. They never clear continuously, and there is always opportunity to profit from this lack of equilibrium and permanently clearing. Thus, profitable traders exist in the market. In fact, profitable traders existing in the market is proof of a lack of permanent equilibrium in the market. So, the lack of market clearing leads to us to the Keynesian assumption of sticky prices and sticky wages over the short term, which I think is a much more realistic theory. Thus, I disagree with a discretionary-based approach because their underlying assumptions are incorrect. Thank you.